What's up, guys? JR Raymond back again, coming to you from my home because there's been breaking news on the entire urethane gate thing with all the testing going on. And there's just a couple of questions that have been brought up over the last day and a half or so. And we're going to talk about those here in a minute, so stay tuned. All right, welcome back. So, to catch some of you up who haven't seen this whole thing, we talked over there's been some drama that's gone on over the last couple of weeks. Well, I guess it's been over the last over the last year or so. Some stuff was brought up at the Summer Swing last year where they suspected certain bowling balls were illegal by rule. Nobody really did any calling out specifically to any certain type of bowling ball, but then Sean Rash got on the TV show after he won and said a couple of comments, and then made some comments on Flow Bowling about basically a certain bowling ball. Everybody knows he was talking about the Purple Hammer. So I did a video on talking about, well, what does urethane do to the lane? Should it be banned? Should it not? Kind of threw my 2 cents into the whole thing. And then we had learned at the TOC that people were talking about this bowling ball, like, they think that there's certain batches that were softer than others. So after all this kind of went down and around, USBC stepped in. Jeff Riggles did an article about it all, posted all the videos in there, and then USBC stepped in and said at the US Open they're going to test all the urethane balls' hardness to make sure they're legal. And they have their list of rules on how they do that. But before all this happened, they had basically like a meeting. They did a study on this because it's been an issue that was brought up. And so they did their study at their facility in Texas to where they studied the urethane bowling balls. And what they noticed is it seemed like the covers of these urethane balls got softer as they were used, the more they were used. So something in the chemical compound was possibly making the cover stocks get softer over time. So what the bowling balls that were all tested and approved from the beginning to be eligible to be used in USBC competition are now all of a sudden being looked at and wondered if they're too soft. So they're doing their testing. They just did their testing, and what they came back with was 2 bowling balls out of we got the numbers here. They just put their preliminary report up, and it says all USBC approved bowling balls must measure at least 72D for hardness at the time of manufacture. So when bowling balls are made and they're sent to USBC to get certified and checked, that's the number they go by. They must be at least 72. So this is using the equipment at their facility in their closed environment, doing all their testing there. Okay, so this is out-of-the-box specification required for USBC approval. USBC spot checks bowling balls against this number, and the data indicates all balls start above this line. Test data over the last 3 years indicate across the population of urethane balls that recent releases are starting closer to that 72D specification line out of box. In the 2019 hardness research report, which was basically put in November, USBC stated bowling balls will measure softer immediately after use. USBC did not have data showing to what extent use over time causes urethane balls to become softer. So basically, they did their research, they did the testing on everything, and that's where they came up with the data that shows that these bowling balls are getting softer over time. How anybody's going to handle this, nobody knows yet. So they did their testing at the US Open, and here's the numbers that they came up with. The results, and this is all straight from USBC, from their page. This isn't speculation. This is straight data and stats from them. The results of the US Open field test showed 109 of the 300 used balls tested, or about 36%, measured under that 72D range. Okay. Now that's an important fact right there. That's an important thing to look at. So technically, if that measurement was taken at USBC's facility, that would be under the requirement, and those bowling balls would then be placed as illegal bowling balls, or they wouldn't pass certification. So that's important to think about. So the theory on this is that over time, these bowling balls have gotten softer, which has brought them down below that number. The balls measuring under 72D include balls from multiple manufacturers and models. So it wasn't just the Purple Hammer. There were other urethane balls that measured underneath it as well. The data indicates some urethane balls are getting progressively softer with use over time. We already talked about that. The effect is not isolated to one manufacturer and can be seen across several models. USBC's independent technical expert has analyzed the data and concluded the results indicate it is not a batch-to-batch variance that is causing balls to measure softer than originally approved. Instead, the technical expert says data indicates that use over time is causing some balls to progressively test softer. So the theory of the 6s or the 7s being softer than some of the 8s or the 9s, I think is kind of debunked by what this is showing. What they're basically saying is those ones are just older and they've been used more. So now they're just getting progressively softer over time. Okay. So this data validates USBC's 2019 hardness research report that concluded urethane balls will measure softer immediately after use. The 2020 US Open data preliminarily indicates that to some extent. The effect also can be progressive over time. This data indicates the effect of becoming softer will use over time eventually. With use over time eventually levels out and the urethane ball's hardness stabilizes. Okay, so balls outside specification for the US Open. USBC's ball check at the US Open indicated 2 bowling balls had fallen below that minimum 68D allowed in the US Open tournament rules. So now that number is 68, and here's where the questions come into play. Because that rule was changed in November and there wasn't a big write-up about it. It wasn't really publicized that that rule was going into effect. What the rule says is basically when you're testing in the field at competition, they give you a 4-point variance down to 68 because of the variance of the durometers, because they all calibrate differently. So the question that was brought to me, which seems to actually make sense, is if USBC is out there doing their testing with their equipment. Now, I don't know if they're using their equipment, if it's borrowed equipment, if it's rented equipment. I have no idea. But let's just assume they are using their own equipment that they would use at their home facility as well. Why is that rule in effect? Why shouldn't the rule still be 72? So shouldn't all of those 109 bowling balls that came under 72 technically fall under, the guidelines of being illegal? But I guess no, because of where they're cited, the rule is 68. So the rule is the rule. They changed that rule in November. So that's the question that comes up. I don't know the answer to that. I would just assume that, the rule's the rule. I don't know. I guess they're just enforcing the rule, and that is what it is. So 68's the number. And there was only 2 bowling balls that came up below 68. Now, the real question is, how many bowling balls, what's the percentage of bowling balls that actually were in that 68 to 69 range? That's what I would like to know. Because would those bowling balls, if taken back to Texas at their facility on their machines, would any of those bowling balls still fail under the 72 rating then? Would they still be under 72? Or would taking them to Texas then make them, pass the 72 rating? We're assuming that they would pass because, they would be at their own facility in a closed environment in their own, whatever you want to call it, that they would pass. But that was the question that was raised. So it was a pretty good question if you ask me. It makes sense. I'm curious on that as well. But so the next steps USBC says here is USBC will publish a full report with data from the US Open hardness test no later than March. The report will be used by USBC to take a fresh look at the hardness standards, tests, and how best to apply to competition rules. The PBA and ball manufacturers will be invited to provide input in the process. In the meantime, all balls on the USBC approved list remain approved for all USBC competition unless an individual ball measures below that minimum 68D specification when tested in accordance with the field test process in the USBC equipment specifications manual. So if I'm a tournament director, I'm not even going to bother looking at this rule because A, I don't have a durometer that can meet their specifications that I can even measure with, and B, it's just such a pain in the butt for something that really doesn't matter all that much. So this just tells you, so anybody that has that question, is your ball legal? Yes, all of your bowling balls are legal. There's nothing wrong with any of your bowling balls. You're fine. Continue to use all of your bowling balls. Nothing unless it's the Jackal or whatever from when they had that issue, last year or 2 years ago or however many years ago it was now. So your bowling balls are legal. You can continue to use them. Use your purple hammers, use your black hammers, use your pitch blacks, use everything that you have. You know, they're fine. Everything is good there. So tournament directors, I wouldn't be trying to implement this rule at all, because you don't have, most people are not going to have this type of equipment that they're looking for you to be able to even implement this rule. So I wouldn't even bother. I would just let it go. So it'll be interesting to see what this study actually shows at the end of the day. At the end of, you know, the tournament, when they come back in March and they do their tests and studies. I would like to see how, you know, how they're going to go about, like, do they raise the standards and make sure, you know, bowling balls stay, you know, now it's 74, so that way they stay at that 70 range rather than 68. I don't know how they go about doing that, but do they just make the rule for future bowling balls? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I'll be curious to hear, but as soon as I hear, or as soon as they post it, you know, I'll let you guys know what's happening. But, you know, that's kind of just what happened at the US Open with all this stuff here. So nobody, no irresponsibleness, no anything. It was just people had questions about these bowling balls, and it was brought up. And kudos to USBC for going and doing their job to make sure the integrity is put in place and is in line. So that's what they're supposed to be doing. So I praise them for going out and doing that. That's a great thing that they're doing, and that's what we need to be doing for the sport and for the future of the sport. And as far as, you know, I had people being mad at me for making the video reporting what people were saying. You know, like I'm bringing up some digging up some bones or something and just blowing something out of proportion. I'm not blowing anything out of proportion. All I'm doing is just reporting what people said, because I thought it was interesting and I thought people wanted to know about it. And obviously people did want to know about it because they tuned in, and now it's been brought to light and USBC's taking care of it, so it's not even a big deal. It's not even a big issue. And they want to call it negative, in a negative light on everything. And I don't think it's negative. I think it's actually a positive thing that players are out there, you know, looking at the integrity and trying to support the integrity and grow the integrity and make it what it should be, just like any other sport. You know, any other sport has all these rules in place, and you bet your butt if Tiger Woods is out there using a golf club that looks like the grooves are a little too deep, they're going to check. You know, all those clubs are checked before each tournament, and they're going to look at those grooves. And if somebody calls them out and those grooves are too deep, he's either A, going to be disqualified because I don't know the rules, or he's just not going to be able to use the club that is under, you know, that was used for, that was not part of, that hasn't been approved for specification. So, I mean, it's just, that's how all sports are, and that's how it's going to be. So I applaud anybody who comes forward and actually, you know, wants to police the rules. Maybe it's not everybody's place to say, hey, you know, you're doing this wrong or you're doing that wrong. But if it's something that you feel like it could, you know, potentially affect the integrity of the game, I don't see anything wrong with bringing it up. So everybody's calling all these people that brought it up crybabies and this and that, and I just don't see it that way. I see it as, you know, let's continue to work together. Let's continue to build the integrity of the sport, no matter the situation. So that's all I got. That's what I just wanted to make sure I read this off to you guys so you guys could see it. I'll put a link in the description so you can read this for yourself if you want. But that's what was posted today from the committee out at the US Open this year. So that's all I got. Make sure to comment below. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe. And until next time, guys, I'm out. We'll see you later. Take care.